The Himalayas are the highest mountain range on Earth. That sentence alone should carry enough weight. But people hear it and picture postcard photographs. Snow-capped peaks against a blue sky, a Sherpa guide smiling for the camera, a triumphant summit selfie with the clouds below. The Himalayas have been photographed so many times and marketed so aggressively as an adventure destination that the actual, documented, measured reality of what happens to human beings who go there has been partially obscured. So let us be clear about that reality before we go further. More than 350 people have died on Mount Everest alone since records began. Annapurna, the 8th tallest mountain in the world, kills roughly 1 climber for every 4 who successfully reach its summit. The Khumbu Icefall, a section of glacier that nearly every Everest climber must cross, moves several feet every day and periodically collapses without warning. There is a zone on every mountain above 8,000 meters where the human body begins dying faster than it can recover, regardless of how healthy or experienced the person inside it is. And climate change is making all of it worse. The Himalayas are magnificent. They are also one of the most consistently lethal environments on Earth. These are the truths that do not make the brochure. The death zone is exactly what it sounds like. Above 8,000 meters above sea level, the human body cannot survive indefinitely. The air contains roughly 1/3 of the oxygen available at sea level. No matter how fit you are, no matter how much supplemental oxygen you carry, no matter how experienced you are, your body is dying faster than it can repair itself from the moment you enter the death zone. Every one of the Himalayan mountains above 8,000 meters has a death zone. There are 14 of them, known collectively as the 8,000ers. All 14 are in the Himalayan and Karakoram ranges. Every serious Himalayan climber eventually spends time in the death zone, and every moment spent there is a calculated gamble with their survival. The physiological consequences of the death zone are well documented. Hypoxia, the deprivation of oxygen to the brain and body, begins causing cognitive impairment before the climber recognizes that their thinking is degraded. Judgment becomes unreliable. Climbers have made decisions in the death zone that no one would make at lower altitude. They have turned back from rescuing others. They have continued climbing past the point of safe return. They have sat down in the snow to rest and not gotten back up. High-altitude pulmonary edema, known as HAPE, causes the lungs to fill with fluid at altitude. High-altitude cerebral edema, known as HACE, causes the brain to swell. Both can kill within hours of their onset. Both can develop in climbers who had no symptoms a day earlier. Both require immediate descent to treat. In the death zone, immediate descent is not always possible. The only cure for altitude sickness in its severe forms is going down. And in the death zone, going down takes time that the body may not have. Annapurna kills 1 in 4. Mount Everest is the most famous mountain in the world. It is also not the most dangerous one. Annapurna, the 10th tallest mountain in the world at 8,091 meters, has the highest fatality rate of any mountain on Earth. Since the first ascent in 1950, more than 70 people have died on Annapurna. The ratio of deaths to successful summits sits at approximately 1 fatality for every 4 successful climbs. Put another way, if you are attempting Annapurna with 3 other climbers, historical statistics suggest one of you will not come back. The causes of Annapurna's extraordinary death rate are specific. The mountain receives enormous snowfall and is subject to avalanche conditions that are essentially constant on the upper slopes. The routes to the summit cross terrain that changes rapidly with weather and has very little margin for error. The weather on Annapurna changes with a speed and unpredictability that even experienced Himalayan climbers find severe. In 2014, an unusual early snowstorm hit the Annapurna region while hundreds of trekkers and climbers were on the mountain and the circuits around it. In a single day, approximately 30 people died in avalanches and weather-related deaths. Many of them were not technical climbers. They were trekkers on established trails who were caught by a storm that arrived faster and with more force than the forecasts had predicted. Annapurna does not discriminate. Experienced mountaineers with multiple 8,000-meter summits have died on it. Trekkers on its lower slopes have been killed. The mountain does what the mountain does. Dead bodies are used as navigation landmarks. The conditions in the death zone make it effectively impossible to retrieve the bodies of climbers who die there. The weight, the physical environment, the risk to the rescuers, and the resources required to bring a body down from above 8,000 meters mean that in the vast majority of cases, the body stays where it fell. As of the most recent counts, more than 200 people who have died on Everest are still on the mountain. They are on the slopes, in crevasses, in ice fields, and on the routes that other climbers pass every season. Some of them have been there for decades and have not moved significantly. Some have been uncovered by melting ice. Some have shifted as the glacier moved. Several of these bodies are well enough preserved and located in well-known positions that they have become unofficial landmarks for climbers navigating the upper mountain. Climbers know them by informal names. Green Boots, a climber believed to be Indian mountaineer Tsewang Paljor, who died in 1996, was visible for years in a cave used as a rest stop on the North Ridge route. Climbers passed his body on their way to the summit and passed it again on the way back down. He served effectively as a waypoint. The ethical weight of using dead climbers to navigate is not lost on the people who use them. Climbers have written about the experience with discomfort and honesty, but the alternative at that altitude, in those conditions, during the limited weather windows that allow summit attempts, is often that the climb is abandoned, and the abandonment of the climb does not help the person who is already dead. The Himalayas are a mountain range that keeps the people it takes. That is not mythology. It is the documented record of what happens when 200 people die in a place that humans cannot physically retrieve them from. The Khumbu Icefall kills Sherpa, guides disproportionately. The Khumbu Icefall is the first major obstacle on the standard South Col route up Everest. It is a section of glacier that falls steeply from the western Khwam above, creating a constantly shifting maze of ice towers called seracs, hidden crevasses, and unstable ice bridges. The icefall moves several feet every single day. Climbers must cross it multiple times during a standard Everest expedition to carry equipment and acclimatize. In 2014, the worst single accident in Everest history occurred in the Khumbu Icefall. A massive serac collapsed without warning and released an avalanche that killed 16 Nepali climbing guides. All of them were Sherpas. Most were working their profession, doing what they did every season to earn the income that supported their families in a region with few economic alternatives. The deaths in the Khumbu Icefall that year illuminated a disparity that had existed for decades but had not received equivalent attention. The Sherpa guides who make Everest expeditions possible carry heavier loads, make more crossings of the most dangerous terrain, and are statistically exposed to more of the risk than the climbers they are guiding. Yet they receive a fraction of the recognition and, until relatively recently, a fraction of the compensation. After the 2014 disaster, many Sherpas refused to work the season. It was a labor action in the most dangerous workplace on Earth, driven by grief and by the long-standing recognition that their lives were being treated as a resource rather than a responsibility. Some reforms followed. The disparity in risk and recognition has not been fully resolved. The Khumbu Icefall does not appear on any list of scenic Himalayan attractions. It is simply the door you must walk through to get to the mountain above, and it reserves the right to close at any moment. The weather can kill you in minutes. The jet stream, the band of high-altitude wind that circles the northern hemisphere, typically sits over the summit of Everest for most of the year. When it does, winds at the summit exceed 100 miles per hour, and temperatures fall below -60 degrees Celsius. No human being can survive on the summit in those conditions. There is typically a window of a few days to a few weeks in late May when the jet stream shifts slightly as the monsoon approaches, lowering the wind speeds enough to make a summit attempt survivable. Most Everest summits happen in this window. Guides, meteorologists, and climbing teams watch the forecast obsessively to identify the exact days when conditions will be low enough. The problem is that the window is shortening. Climate change has made the timing of the weather window less predictable. The window that historically fell reliably in the third week of May now varies. What the forecast says on Monday may not reflect what the mountain does on Wednesday. In 1996, a storm that arrived faster than forecasts predicted caught multiple groups of climbers near the summit. 8 people died in what became the worst single-season Everest disaster to that point. The storm was not unprecedented in its severity. It was unprecedented in its speed and timing. In the Himalayas, the weather does not wait for you to get to safety. The storms that develop over the Tibetan Plateau and rush toward the high peaks can reach the upper mountain in a fraction of the time it takes climbers to descend. A clear summit morning can become a survival scenario by afternoon. This is not an edge case. It is a recurring pattern in the documented history of the range. Glaciers are collapsing. The Himalayas contain the largest concentration of glaciers outside the polar regions, sometimes called the Third Pole. These glaciers feed the major rivers of South Asia, including the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, and the Mekong, providing water to more than 1 billion people downstream. They are melting. A 2019 study found that Himalayan glaciers are losing ice twice as fast as they were before the turn of the century. The top layer of ice near the Everest summit was found to be around 2,000 years old, suggesting the glacier had thinned more than 80 times faster than the time it took to form that ice. For climbers, melting glaciers mean that routes that were stable for decades are now unpredictable. Crevasses are widening. Seracs are becoming more unstable as the ice that anchors them thins. Sections of glacier that provided firm footing are now soft enough to collapse without warning. Crampons designed for ice are being used on exposed rock that was never meant to be walked on. For the billion people downstream, the consequences are more severe and more permanent. Glacial lake outburst floods, where lakes formed by glacial melt burst their ice dams and release catastrophic walls of water into river valleys below, are increasing in frequency. As the glaciers shrink, the rivers they feed will eventually carry less water during dry seasons, affecting agriculture, drinking water, and energy production for a population larger than the entire continent of Europe. The Himalayas are melting, and the consequences of that will extend far beyond anything that happens on the mountain routes. Overcrowding on Everest is killing people. In 2019, photographs of a queue of climbers stretching hundreds of meters along the summit ridge of Everest circulated around the world. The images showed people standing in a line at extreme altitude, waiting for the person ahead of them to move forward, burning through their oxygen supplies and their body reserves while standing still in a zone where standing still is dangerous. That season, 11 people died on Everest. Overcrowding was identified as a contributing factor in multiple deaths. Nepal sells permits for Everest at a rate that has increased dramatically over recent decades as the commercial climbing industry has grown. In recent years, more than 400 permits have been issued in a single season. The fixed rope route to the summit, which most commercial expeditions follow, creates a single-lane highway on a mountain where the weather window for safe summit attempts is only a few days long. When hundreds of climbers attempt to use that route in the same short window, the bottleneck that forms in exposed locations at extreme altitude is not a logistical inconvenience. It is a deadly condition. Climbers standing in a queue at 8,000 meters are spending oxygen. When their oxygen runs out or their reserves become too low to ensure a safe descent, they are in the death zone without the buffer that makes the death zone survivable. The photographs from 2019 showed people making decisions not based on mountain conditions, but on the fact that the person in front of them was not moving. The permit system that allows this continues. The queue on the summit ridge continues to form during peak season, and the people at the back of it continue to gamble on whether the person at the front will move fast enough. Most Himalayan deaths happen on the way down. The summit of a Himalayan peak is not the finish line. It is the halfway point. Data from the Himalayan database shows that more than 60% of Everest deaths occur during the descent, after the summit has been reached. This pattern holds broadly across the other 8,000ers as well. The reason is physiological and physical. Climbers who reach the summit have exhausted significant physical and mental reserves getting there. They are at maximum altitude, maximum fatigue, and usually at a critical point in their oxygen supply. The euphoria of reaching the summit can mask the urgency of the descent. Every additional minute spent at the summit to take photographs, to sit, to absorb the achievement, is a minute spent in the death zone that the body cannot afford. The descent requires the same technical skill as the ascent, but in a body that has been working at maximum output for hours or days, in declining light as afternoon storms approach, with fatigue-degraded judgment and muscle failure beginning in the legs. Falls on the descent have killed skilled climbers who had managed the ascent without incident. Decisions made on the way down, when the goal has already been achieved and the psychological urgency has shifted, have killed people who survived everything the ascent threw at them. The summit photograph is proof of achievement. The descent is the part that actually decides whether you survive. Children are living in one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth. The Himalayas exist because of a geological collision that is still happening. The Indian tectonic plate is moving north and pressing against the Eurasian plate at a rate of approximately 2 inches per year. This collision is what built the mountains in the first place and what continues to push them higher. It also produces earthquakes of extraordinary scale. On April 25, 2015, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck Nepal. Nearly 9,000 people died. More than 600,000 homes were destroyed. The earthquake triggered an avalanche at Everest Base Camp that killed 19 people in a single surge. Entire villages in the mountain regions were buried under rockfall or destroyed by structural collapse. This was not the first major earthquake in the Himalayas, and it will not be the last. The geological forces that are still building the mountains generate seismic stress on a timescale that makes the intervals between large earthquakes feel like calm. They are not calm. They are intervals of loading between releases. More than 26 million people live in Nepal alone. Hundreds of millions more live in the regions shaped and threatened by the same geological forces that built the Himalayas. Most of the buildings in mountainous regions of Nepal, northern India, Bhutan, and Tibet were not designed to modern earthquake standards. The next large earthquake in the Himalayan zone will not announce itself in advance. The Himalayas are getting more dangerous, not less. All of the truths on this list are becoming more acute over time, not less. Climate change is melting glaciers, shortening weather windows, making routes less predictable, and increasing the frequency of glacial lake outburst floods. The commercial climbing industry is increasing the number of inexperienced climbers, attempting extreme altitudes with inadequate preparation. Overcrowding on fixed rope routes is creating deadly queues in the death zone, and the atmospheric changes above 8,000 meters that climate models predict will reduce effective oxygen levels further at extreme altitude, making the death zone more lethal even for the same physical effort. The Himalayas are the highest mountains on Earth. They were always going to be dangerous. But the combination of environmental change and commercial expansion is compressing the safety margins in ways that the people who study the range most closely have been documenting for years. Between 1950 and 2021, more than 1,000 people died in the Nepal Himalaya alone. 405 of those deaths occurred in just the first 2 decades of this century. The rate is increasing. The interest in climbing is increasing. The conditions are deteriorating. The Himalayas are extraordinary. They are also a place where the full weight of what extraordinary actually means on a physical planet makes itself felt in ways that no photograph, no film, and no description fully prepares you for. The mountains are still there. They are still being climbed, and they are still deciding, on their own terms, who comes back. Which of these truths change the way you think about the Himalayas? Leave it in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring the places on this planet that demand to be understood before they can be safely approached, subscribe to Parallel Facts. We will keep going.